would be really great for discussions. So if you're going to meet people for discussions, it would be great if you choose one of those. And you can find people and you can follow friends into different lobbies. So that's why we made them actually different events and not mirrored events. I'd like to say we are very pleased and honored to have with us here the current AES president, Agnieszka Roginska. And she has kindly agreed to say a few words to us today. So I'd like to ask Agnieszka, could you please come up to the stage? And we will ask Agnieszka to amplify her voice at this moment, if she would.
Hello, everyone. There we go. All right, it's great to see you. Isn't this so cool? I am delighted to be here with you today as AES president, and I hope that everybody is staying healthy and safe during this pandemic. What a year. I have to say, what a year. When I became president in January, I honestly had no idea what the year would unfold as it has. I was really looking forward to connecting in person with our members at one of the many AES events. And I have to say that one of the biggest highlights for me personally was this AVAR conference because of how closely it connects to my research on immersive sound. I'm very honored to serve as AES president through these times, and not only do I think we will emerge stronger on the other side, this is truly a great moment in our history to move forward and to open the door and discover and develop the future of audio and of audio engineering. The AES mission is clear. Right? The AES mission is to promote the science and practice of audio by bringing leading people and ideas together. And nowhere is this mission more clearly embodied than right here at this AVAR conference. This conference brings together pioneers, researchers, engineers, educators, and artists. Right here, right now, we are dreaming up the future of audio, of how people will create, experience, consume, and collaborate. This has been a year of many firsts for the AES, including the first virtual convention in May. Many of you, I know, attended. And this is the first ever AES event where we bring the AES community together in virtual reality. Not only is this experience more accessible to the global community than ever before, with really no geographical boundaries, but meeting in virtual reality allows us to connect with one another around the globe in a much more meaningful way. This is truly a historical moment for the AES. I'd like to express my deepest gratitude to the conference organizing committee, and especially to the co-chairs, Matt Klassen and Lawrence Schwelder. Organizing a conference is a very large undertaking under normal circumstances, and Matt and Lawrence know this because 2 years ago they organized a very, very successful AVAR conference at DigiPen, and I think that many of us here were with them 2 years ago. But organizing a conference during a pandemic is absolutely monumental. So from the bottom of my heart, Matt and Lawrence, thank you so much. And I thank you all for joining us. Welcome to the AVAR conference, and I welcome you to the future of audio engineering. Thank you.
So much, Agnieszka.
Thank you.
Next, AVAR Papers Chair, Pablo Hoffman. Will you please come up, and Pablo will introduce our keynote speaker and we'll be off and running.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. Can everyone hear me? All right. So, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our first keynote lecture. It is a great pleasure for me to introduce our speaker, Varun Nair. Varun has 15 years of experience working with audio on hundreds of projects, including software development, product management, media post-production, and interactive content production. He co-founded 2 Big Ears and led development of audio tools and technology for virtual reality, augmented reality, and emerging immersive media. In 2016, 2 Big years was acquired by Facebook, where Varun currently leads the AR/VR audio software team working on algorithms, tools, spatial audio technology, and scalable audio systems across a wide range of software and hardware products.
Pablo, I'm going to interrupt you for just a moment. I need to set you on air. I'm so sorry. Can you do that from your host tools? On air? So that people in the other rooms can... My bad, I'm sorry. I didn't know how to do that with the tools.
All right. Now I'm on air and with the amplify my voice.
Thank you so much.
All right. Let me just restart then. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our first keynote lecture. It is a great pleasure for me to introduce our speaker, Varun Nair. Varun has 15 years of experience working with audio on hundreds of projects, including software development, product management, media post-production, and interactive content production. He co-founded 2 Big Ears and led development of audio tools and technology for virtual reality, augmented reality, and emerging immersive media. In 2016, 2 Big Ears was acquired by Facebook, where Varun currently leads the AR/VR audio software team working on algorithms, tools, spatial audio technology, and scalable audio systems across a wide range of software and hardware products. Varun's talk today is entitled New Audio Realities at Scale, where he will walk us through the past, present, and future of what it takes to create compelling VR and AR audio experiences at a scale of billions of people. Please join me in welcoming Varun Nair to the stage. Welcome, Varun. The floor is all yours.
Okay, thanks, Pablo. Hi, everyone. It's really good to be here. Just give me a second while I calibrate myself and get everything set up.
Great, Varun. And do make sure that you also are on air. It's in the host tools, the little radio broadcast tower icon.
Yes.
And also that you have amplify my voice. Thank you so much.
As one check, we should be seeing new audio realities at scale on the main screen. Okay, and just for safety, I'm going to reset the space one more time just to make sure that
Matt.
Yes.
Then everybody will have to go on air again.
That's true. So did we get a good enough confirmation there? That I think.
Well, that's fine.
Yep, that's okay. No, and I think we're just making sure that the live stream is also seeing that. So yeah, if you guys are all good, let's just start.
I think I'll need to pop out and pop back in. My browser isn't functioning, so.
Okay.
Hang in there, everyone. I'll be back.
Yep.
Yeah. No
So
worries.
this is some of the smoke happening here now, but the Quest users, each of us each of the types of user, 2D mode or HMDs, various different ones, they all have their own glitches. And for some reason, some Quest users, they had the browser disappearing, which is the InVR browser that he needs to use to advance the slides. It's just a complication that probably no one needs to hear about, right, Lawrence?
Well, I think it's interesting, and we've been immersed in it for 3 months now, so we're used to it. And but I think it's kind of interesting that all of us, everybody who's here, has had to cross some sort of threshold to get here. Whether it was getting a PC, you're a Mac user, getting virtual reality, some people for the first time, and then just conquering all those little hurdles. Just some of them are minor, but the minor hurdles in VR can be as major as anything, because if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. So anyway, we thank you all for bearing with us. And hopefully Varun will be back shortly. Matt, do you have your backup keynote address ready to go in case Varun can't make it back in?
Yeah, although mine would be a mathematics lecture, so I don't really think that would be appropriate.
Yay, math lecture, yeah. Right. All right. We'll see if Varun's
will
back
be
in
responding
space.
in the back.
Yeah, he'll have to walk all the way from the patio. His legs are going to get really tired, but you know, he can use the exercise. It's okay. We can all use the exercise. All right, I see him. He's in his home space.
Okay.
I put a tracking device on him so I could keep tabs on him. So
Okay.
hopefully he's on his way back in. Yeah, we should have our backup.
Well, yeah. Why don't you message him if he doesn't get that NVR browser working? We can.
We
advance the
can
slides
just
for him.
we can advance his slides for him. That's right. Let me.
What?
Sure, I'll send him a message
I'll get it up on my laptop. His slide
just in
deck.
case.
Mhm.
Sure. Interesting. Let's see if we get this. I'm just trying to message him here. He's not in the space now. Hopefully he remembered to charge up his Quest. For any of you Quest users, we've been informed that low battery on any of the mobile platforms, the Quest or the Go, can actually influence your FPS, your frames per second that you get in VR. So
Okay, just as a backup, I've got a slide deck up on my laptop. Does everybody
all right,
see the
he should be
Yes.
here. He's showing up in Keynote, so let's see if he's here. There he is. Nope. That's Marvin. Let's see. So he's showing up in Keynotes, and I've asked him to go on air to make sure that he's here.
Oh, okay. But we can try to put him on air as well.
Sure. There he is. Yay.
Okay, Varun. Did that work with your browser, or do we need to advance the slide deck for you?
Okay, I think I'll need some help with advancing the slides.
Okay. We can
I'm
do
unable to
that.
get that to work.
Yeah, we
Lawrence
can
and
do that
Matt,
for
can you
you.
help me with that?
Yes. I'm not sure if you're hearing us.
I sent him a message saying okay.
Okay. Yep. Let's just do because I didn't hear
Okay,
Varun.
can you all
let's
hear me?
check with the audience.
Yes, we
the
can hear you,
audience.
Varun. Can you hear us?
Yes, all good.
We can hear you.
Let- Yeah, let's see from the audience. Can
Right.
people hear Varun?
Time to go on
Yes.
air, and let's get this rolling.
Yep.
Oh, good. People can hear you.
Okay, so I can go ahead and advance the slides.
Okay, we're on air, and here we go. All right, thanks everyone. Sorry for this initial glitch, but it isn't a technical conference. We don't run technical. I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for having me. Thanks for organizing this conference, and it's great to see you all virtually. I must admit it's nice to there's a sense of space in being here and being with people and your avatars, and of course once again reinforced a belief that emojis rule the internet. So and rule virtual reality. So all right. Since we're running a bit behind, I'll ensure that I do my best to stay on track. So I'm here today to talk about new audio realities at scale. Pablo, thanks so much for the introduction, so I can mostly just skim over the slide. I do want to call out that one of the things that really underpins my talk today is sort of the multidisciplinary aspect of building new audio technologies. It takes people from diverse backgrounds and lots of different areas, from research, design, software engineering, hardware engineering, to get a lot of the technologies that we believe in, that we envision for the future in our products today. So in our products today and the products we like to see in the future. So if we want to advance the slide, yes. What's this talk about? It's not so much about technology. For those of you who've seen me speak before over the past few years, it's largely been strategic and technology focused. I decided to take a step back this time and really reflect on some of the key themes that that I've experienced over the past few years, and also some of my learnings. I talk a lot about scale. We can advance to the next slide. What do I actually mean by new audio reality at scale? Could be about how do new audio technologies become products? How do we prioritize all the things we envision for the future and get it out to people? But I'm really interested in the last point here that I put on the slide, which is how do we get more people to experience new audio technology? How can they get value out of it? How can our customers, whether it's developers, users, end users of our devices and applications, whether it's, say, a VR headset or a new experience that you might be making for VR or AR, how do we get this to as many people as possible? And why is this important? I think we're at a point where VR has been, this new resurgence of VR has been a thing for a few years now. And we find lots of people experiencing this in many shapes and forms. Even today, this conference is a really good example. We've got people joining in from VR, watching this over a live stream channel, joining in through a browser. This by itself is a diverse representation of what immersive formats mean today. Advance to the next slide. So let's take a step back. I want to talk a bit about what it takes to build technology. Now, this is by no means a prescriptive or a rule book about how new technologies are developed, but just a way for us to ground our conversation today. Typically, when we think about developing new technologies, say a new spatial audio technology, or some new algorithm, or some new hardware, or some new product, we start from two areas. We either have product requirements that requires us to build these technologies and meet specific requirements from the product specification, or we've got new technologies that we think are valuable to get out to people, and we try and find a means to do so, or a channel to get it out. Typically, when we've got a new technology, we try and discover what new use cases it can enable. We start with some kind of research that validates some kind of hypothesis we have or demonstrates the value of technology, but then we need to go and discover how people can benefit from it, how our products can benefit from it. And one of the key things that comes out of that process is to figure out what kind of barriers exist to ship this technology. There's never a piece of technology that has zero barriers of entry. There's usually technical restrictions or restraints like performance, memory, power, and then there are also more user-focused constraints, such as how easy is it to discover this piece of technology? Ultimately, how much value does it bring? So, for example, if it's spatial audio technology, what are the use cases for it, and how immersive does it make the experience? And discovering these barriers to productize this technology is really the heart of the problem once we get past that research stage. And then it's a constant process of iteration to reduce these barriers as much as possible. Sometimes some of these barriers are impossible to get over, and then we have to go back to research, look at workarounds, and come back to the plan. And ultimately, we ship it in some shape or form. Key things to take away from the slide are barriers to entry and this iterative process, and I'll talk a bit more. So what is scale? If you see things from Facebook, or you even look at job adverts for jobs at Facebook, you'll find us often talking about scale. What does this even mean? And why am I gonna mention this word at least a few hundred more times during this presentation? We often think about technologies when we start from research. We think about applications of these technologies. What I care a lot about is how can we bring these technologies in a way that is agnostic, is device agnostic in some shape or form. So to give you an example, we've got the VR market today, which is sizable. A few years ago, it was not. We continue to see it grow. We're starting to see AR emerge as a new medium, right from camera-based AR experiences to devices of the future across the industry. More specific to my job right now is we've got a massive user base within our Facebook ecosystem. We've got billions of users, many of whom have not. Yes?
I'm so sorry to interrupt. Some of our people can't see the slides advancing. So I'm sorry that you're subjected to this bleeding edge, but can I think we're going to reset the space, and I just wanted to see, is anybody in this room not seeing the slides advance? Could you just give me a sad face emoji? Oh, our hand. Yeah, okay. So that means, Varun, a lot of people aren't seeing your slides, and I apologize. So Matt, I'm going to reset the space, and let's see if that fixes it. So just everybody stand by. Do that now. And here we go. It'll just take a couple seconds. Let's see if that helps. And Varun. And Varun, are you back on air?
Doing that now. I can. Hey, my browser's back.
Wow. Let's see. Quick. What are we doing on slides here? Why don't you go back to the previous slide and let's see if people can see that. So, okay. Did everybody see that? If you saw this, if you didn't see the slide change now, give me a sad face. Okay, it looks like we're working. And Varun, do you want to control your own slides now rather than have Matt advance them?
Loading it up. Let's give it a moment.
I'll get off stage. Thank you, everybody, for your indulgence.
Okay, I'm going to advance the slide. Please give me some sort of signal if you see it change. I'll switch it over now. Can everyone see it? Okay. Significant number of people. Great. Nice. It's also great that I can see my slides now, so I know what I'm talking about. All right. We're on air, and let's pick this up where we left off. So I was talking about scale and the fact that I'm going to mention this word many times during this presentation, but let me give this some shape or form. Okay, I'm seeing a few sad faces, so I'm not sure what that means. Unable to see the slides advance.
Yeah, I'm not sure what to do about that, folks.
At this point,
I-
Lawrence, I think they could try re-entering or go to the live stream, but we probably
Okay,
should just
yeah.
call it good for now.
Yeah, let's do that so we don't get too far behind schedule, folks. So if you can't see the slides events, try re-entering the space. And if that doesn't work, perhaps you can watch the live stream and try to catch the panels. Maybe we'll have better luck in there. Sorry about that, Varun. Just
No worries. I'll do
my.
I'll do my best to be as descriptive as possible so you don't miss out on the slides if you don't skip. So when we talk about scale, we're thinking about, at least I'm thinking about technologies that are agnostic. They work everywhere. In an ideal case, work on every single device in the world. Technologies that could still be device specific because maybe it requires a specific hardware form factor, but is still able to create a consistent experience in a wider ecosystem. And ultimately, products that reach a large number of people are inclusive and create delightful experiences. So let's use an example here, right? So I go online using my laptop, get on a browser, start watching some immersive media content. I then switch over to my phone, continue watching it there, and I find some of my friends are online, and then I jump into VR to experience that content along with them. Now, I've used the same piece of content, or maybe some family of content, across different devices and different experiences. Scale here is being able to get to a point where we are able to adapt that content across each of these different platforms, and make it still enjoyable for people, and immersive if the platform allows for it. We've got pieces of that today, especially with the more traditional media where you can watch a video on a browser, then watch it on a phone, and continue watching it in VR. But that's still a lot of our traditional media. And when we're talking about VR and AR, and that's the large focus of this conference here, is how do we then bring in the dimensions that we have in these immersive formats with immersive technologies and get this to work everywhere. Specifically, when we've got a user base of billions of people, even if they don't have a VR headset today or don't have a means to experience that, how could we give them a peek into this future and get them to at least experience a slice of it with the devices or the platforms that they have access to today? So I'm going to focus on two areas. This is where I'm going to branch my talk and thinking and talk about technology at scale on one end, the sort of pipe, and adoption at scale on the other end. Because we can create all the technology that we want, but if we are unable to get to a point where enough people are using it and finding value from it, and adopting it, our work is half done. And likewise, we need to be able to adapt technologies to ensure adoption, and ultimately work towards building this future that we all care about. So let's focus on technology at scale. So what I have on my slide here, in case those of you can't see it, I've just got a spectrum here. On one side, I've got a list that says no users, no power available, no compute available, no memory, no bandwidth, and ultimately minimum user value. And on the other side, we've got all users, infinite power available, infinite compute available, infinite memory, infinite bandwidth, and maximum user value. Oops, it's a typo on the slide. That's supposed to be maximum user value. So in an ideal world, we'd want to get to a point where we can take a piece of technology and get it out to as many people as possible, or pretty much every single person who has access to it. Or if you think even broader than that, every single person in the world, in the universe, to experience this. But to do that, we need infinite everything. We need infinite power, infinite bandwidth, infinite resources, infinite computing power to deliver that huge user-facing impact. That's impossible. On the other hand, we don't want to get to a point where we have users who are unable to experience anything. So how do we go about prioritizing technologies we develop when we've got a user base of billions of people? How do we get them to still get some value regardless of where they are on the spectrum? So one way that we usually approach this is to think about categorizing our user base based on where they are in the spectrum. So we can't get to all users. So how do we break this up and get to a point where we can get to most users, if not all? A common way, if you think about technology, is to categorize a user base based on the capabilities of the device. I'm on a high-end PC that can pull a lot of. Give me a second. Right, should be easier to hear now. All right, turn my voice on megaphone. All right, see lots of happy people. Great. Sorry about that. So we're talking about categorizing a user base based on capabilities of the device. This is typically how you'd approach a technology problem where you've got something that you need to ship to a large number of people. You know that they use a variety of devices, so let's categorize that user base based on the capabilities of the device. I have a slide here that breaks it down into low, medium, high-end, and some kind of a reference. Let me talk about this a bit. Right? So in an ideal world, we'd have, based on the research that we developed, some kind of a reference. This is our impossible state. It probably requires some advanced simulation, lots of computing power, ideal listening environments, maybe a lab to make all of this possible. And that gives us a reference. It's our ground truth of what the future looks like and what we need to do to get there. And then we'd have, say, devices like a high-end device. It could be a standalone VR device or a PC that has all the compute power to get to most of what we expect. And then we've got medium and low-end devices that have some capabilities, a few capabilities from that ideal reference that we envision. The ideal reference that I'm talking about here is critical. And this is where work as researchers and people building technologies of the future can play an outsized role. Because often product teams and even software teams and even technologists working in this area need a reminder of what this future sounds like. What does it mean to have, say, the next generation of spatial audio technologies? How much value does it provide? Once we experience it, it's easier to believe in it. For those of you working in audio, you know that it's often really hard to verbally describe it or even visually describe it. You often really get the best experience when you experience it in person. So investing in this ideal reference state is really important because it gives us a ground truth. It helps us know what this future is like. But then we have a question here. Like, is there some kind of step change in capabilities as we try and shape that reference into these range of devices? Do we need some kind of a graceful transition? Or is it okay for us to just classify by, say, technological capabilities of the device, find different cuts of this technology and get us to that state? Let's talk about this in a bit. So most research starts here. Right? We've got an ideal reference state, and then we're trying to get the best approximation of the reference state that can ship in a product. This is really where all the hard problems are. Of course, not discounting the fact that groundbreaking research by itself is often impossible and hard. Taking it from that state to something that can ship in a product and finding that best approximation that gets us as close to the future we believe in is typically where we see a lot of effort across multiple areas. But often we actually end up needing significantly more research when we are focusing on this area between the medium and high-end capabilities. Because at this point, we're talking about either dumbing down the technology to such a significant extent that it might not just have the value that we expected it to have, or we need to go back to our drawing board and build up something new from scratch that still gets us close to the experience of that ideal reference state, but is able to ship on some of these devices. And then there's a question of what really happens for that low end state. This is typically where it starts to become more of an engineering problem, where you're trying to optimize the technology or the algorithm as much as possible to run to just function on these low-end devices. I'm talking a bit in the abstract here, so let's use an example. Right? Let's use spatial audio quality as an example. So, for a reference for building, say, the next iteration of spatial audio technology is that we'd have a demo of highly accurate spatial audio. Probably requires a lot of compute power, something that we don't have or might not have today in the devices we ship at scale. So our high-end iteration of it would be, it's very similar to the reference, but we cut some corners. But we run user studies, and we find that most people find it to be convincing enough. And the word enough here is really important. It might not be the exact representation of our high-end device or of our reference state, but it gets us pretty close. Scaling this down to a device with some capabilities, if not most capabilities, would be a significant drop in spatial audio quality, maybe a sense of immersion or externalization of some of these other metrics that we use. Might not score as high, but it still provides some value to the user. It still creates some kind of an immersive experience. And at the low end, maybe we just have no compute at all, and we end up with something that just sounds like stereo panning, very little immersion. So when you approach it this way, just looking at the amount of effort it takes to go from the reference to the high end, and then fitting that into like the medium range of devices, and you might just say, what's the point of even getting some of these technologies out on devices that have few capabilities? Just fall back to stereo panning or no panning at all, and call it the end of it. In some cases, this might be okay because you might be dealing with a fairly small user base, but when you start extending this out in the millions and billions of people, you find that there are significant markets in each of these areas, and there's still value in getting this out to people. But is it really worth the effort of putting in all of this research and technology work into making this possible? To go back to my previous slide, in an ideal world, we'll have infinite resources to do all of this, but the reality is we often don't. But this is where I think it's really important for us to take a step back when we're building these technologies and not just care about a small set of metrics. When we talk about spatial audio, where we just fall back on the metrics that we're all used to: externalization, accuracy evaluation, how accurate is it to some kind of a real world anchor. But often when we build these technologies, there's a lot more to it, right? Is it fair to use just the quality and some of these performance metrics as the only way to judge these technologies? I say not. So this wouldn't be a complete presentation without a graph, and this is not a real graph. It is just for me to illustrate my point. So let's just plot this out. Say we've got on the x-axis increasing device capabilities. On the y-axis, we've got increasing spatial audio quality. There's typically a point where we reach where even with lots of computing power, you reach a point where of diminishing returns. Likewise, as you scale this quality down, there reaches a point where it stops being of any use because you just don't get any sense of immersion from it. And that's really what spatial audio technology is about, right? But this is where I disagree, because when we think about these technologies, we often also need to consider the utility of it. So let's use an example here. If I'm in a VR game that's highly immersive, spatial audio quality matters a lot. If I'm in an experience such as this, the one we're in right now, spatial audio quality does matter. It gives you a sense of where I am in the space, but there's also some utility to it. Right? And this is more so when we think about, say, video conferencing, where adding spatial audio, even if it is not highly accurate in a video call, can help deal with overlapping conversations, make it easier to follow people. in large groups to still get a sense of who's speaking if you lose the video stream. So there is a sense of utility to it. And as we widen up our user base and think about growing it beyond a critical amount of people, we find increasing value in just thinking about the utility of these technologies. And it might be worth getting some shape or form, even if we lose a sense of immersion that we'd expect from spatial audio in this scenario. There might be a trade-off to make here for the utility of it. But this is also where I want to challenge how we traditionally think about shipping these technologies at scale, and to not think about it as specific devices or specific device capabilities, but instead to think about what the end experience is going to be. Because every day, all of us use multiple devices, or at the very least, we use, say, a desktop or a laptop and a phone, maybe a tablet, a VR headset, and we go through a week touching many of these devices, often with overlapping ecosystem. And we might start an experience in one, end it in the other, and we are starting to see initial versions of many of these things across the ecosystem, and increasingly more with every passing year. So instead, we should be building a future of technologies where we are thinking of this as a more modular landscape or a modular ecosystem, where our technology platforms and what we build for the future may be device specific just because of the hardware capabilities, or maybe the way the transducers are built, how the microphones are placed. That could be very specific to the device, but that might end up being the minority. At the grand scale at which we're thinking about, we might want to just think about a platform that can self-optimize, self-modularize, and optimize against these metrics, where the metrics are not just the quality of the experience, just the sense of immersion that we get from it when we're thinking of spatial audio again as an example, but perhaps the utility of it. And this is where we have to spend a lot more effort as well. How do we even define what the utility of it is? User research is a great way. Going back to my slide right at the start, when we're building new technologies and understanding what our barriers are, we should not just be thinking about the technological barriers, but also ultimately what utility and value these technologies bring to people. Which brings me to the second part of adoption. State, at least to me, of having a technology platform that can be modular, that can bring utility, value, and just pleasant experiences to people across the range of devices and platforms they operate in. How do we ultimately get this to be more widely adopted? I've put down 4 points here on the slide, where another way to look at adoption at scale is reducing these barriers of entry. I've called out the user experience. For those of you who can't read the slide or see this, the user technology is hard to work with or get some or get a sense of it. Optionality. Are there too many options or parameters in the technologies that we expose? This could apply both to end users as well as the developers and designers. Discoverability. Is the technology always on, or do people need to invest some time and effort to discover it? And the fourth are physical barriers. Does the product physically restrict use of the technology? So user experience here really matters, because is there anything in the product flow, either visually, orally, APIs that we design for our SDKs that inhibits the experience in some shape or form? When we expose these out, do we give people too many options to choose from? Like how does that inhibit or create barriers to entry? And finding out this balance is key, because sometimes you might want to have this optionality because it provides some value, but that value needs to be really outsized if you want people to put in the time and effort to play with that optionality. And it's also important to think of how you user-based functions as well, because maybe for developers and designers, you do want to have maximum optionality to give them maximum control over the experience they're crafting. But as an end user, you probably want to see less of that. Is the technology always on? Defaults here are extremely important because for most people, they start with defaults, and that's the first taste of the experience that they get of whatever your technology is. So if it's always on, what are those defaults and how do you go about setting the best defaults of the experience? Or if it's not always on, what is that flow, whether it's user experience or something else, or even the user interface that helps people discover it and ultimately find value in it? Because if they have to put in the time and effort to go and discover something, the reward needs to be outsized. And lastly, what are the physical barriers here? Does the product physically restrict the use of technology? Are there hardware restrictions? Does it require some additional, say, an additional cable or something else that needs to be plugged in? Are there other aspects to how the product itself is designed? Maybe it's a protocol or connectivity or Bluetooth or Wi-Fi or something else that requires the user to interact with the technology a lot more than they're used to, that could inhibit or restrict its use. So let's talk about the UX angle a bit. A few years ago, when we started rolling out spatial audio support at Facebook scale, we're talking about supporting browsers and iOS and Android devices, spatial audio rendering for 360 media and immersive formats. One of the barriers that we faced here was discoverability, to ensure that people actually understand what they were experiencing and being able to discover these formats, the user experience of it, and physical barriers. Physical barriers here were plugging a pair of headphones in, right? Because we've got the spatial audio experience that works best over headphones. Not everybody plugs in headphones when they're using their mobile devices or laptops. How do we encourage people to do that so that they could get the best experience? So a minor user experience thing that we did was every time a video with spatial audio was detected, we'd put in a prompt for people to plug in headphones. This is something that would play before every video. For people who saw this the first time, we also have additional little prompts to show people the value of plugging their headphones in. For those of you who can't see the video, in case of technical issues, I've just got a loop of a 360 video here where we start the video with the prompt of wear headphones for the experience. This was important to do because we saw that shift in people actually plugging in headphones and getting value from it. And we'd often see it on the comments of these videos and elsewhere about how much of a difference it made. And this is what I mean by giving people a slice of the future that we're building for. Even if they don't have a VR headset, they could still experience a bit of it with the comfort of their phones or their desktop browsers. Here's another example of physical barriers. Right? So with the Oculus Quest, we've got built-in speakers. The Rift and Rift S have over-the-ear speakers. For the Quest, it's off on the side by the straps. Something that we learned early on with Gear VR, which was our mobile-based VR experiences, was that if people had to plug in headphones, a lot of people just won't, because this goes back to defaults. The default state is device as is, they put it on. If they had to plug in a pair of headphones, they need to get it out of their bag, untangle the wires, plug it in, or if they were using a Bluetooth device, there'd be pairing, just the complexities with pairing, and then there'd be additional latency, and we wouldn't really be able to influence that experience, and it wasn't great. Which is why we've been investing in these default states for our devices, where we've got built-in speakers that makes the experience of putting the device on and taking it off as smooth as possible, and so that with the default experience, people get something that's pretty good. And we do have a trade-off here that we've made. The experience from these transducers are not going to compare to $1,000 headphones that you might have in your studio, right? But it still gets us something that is a pretty good experience for a large number of people with the default state. And over time, as the technology improves and matures, we'd see this experience only getting better. So going back to my first slide where I spoke about the new technology lifecycle, where we've got new technologies, we try and discover use cases, we discover barriers to productize, we iterate, and then we ship. When we start developing new technologies at scale, we need to not think about scale at that point. We really want to go off and develop new technology with as few constraints as possible. As we move down this chart, we need to start bringing those constraints and thoughts about scale in. Right? How do we even figure out whether the use cases that we're thinking about matter for the product, for our users? And this is where extensive user research can hugely impact and influence our decisions downstream. Can the barriers of entry be overcome technologically or with product design? And this is where we try and widen our point of view as much as possible. Is it just about optimizing an algorithm? Is it going back and making a physical change in the hardware? Is it about changing the kind of compute requirements that we have for the device? And this is where really planning for our technology, sometimes months or years in advance, plays a big role, especially if you need to go and make changes in hardware to support it. And then we want to reduce as many barriers of entry to maximize scale and impact. Going back to those 4 examples that I put down, what does the user experience look like? What are our barriers for using this technology? What is our default state? And how can we approach scaling this across our user base, whether they have a specific piece of hardware or not? I want to end with just a last point here, and then we can open up questions and move on to the panel. Scaling is not just about thinking about things horizontally, but also vertically. And I talk about scaling to level up. What do I mean by that? So we're experiencing this right now. We've got traditional media formats and traditional technologies colliding with this world or this universe of immersion that we're building up for the future. We're using VR and AR, but we're building or using these devices, but we're still using technologies that have been built over the past many decades. Let's use voice capture as an example. Right? So we've got this conference where we've got people who've joined via their VR devices, some who've joined via mobile or desktop devices, and others who are watching this on a streaming channel. All of this is using networking technologies and audio technologies that have been built up over multiple decades. And if you think about voice and connectivity, a large part about bringing people together in VR is helping them communicate in an efficient way, and nothing better than our voice for that. But what happens when you are in VR? You've got a VR headset, say your friend's got a VR headset, but you've got somebody else calling in from a mobile phone or calling in from a messaging service via an app. What happens then? Right? This is where things really start to jar, because you could have the best spatial audio technology, but if you've got somebody joining in via a telephony stack, even if you've got the best personalized HRTF, your incoming signal is not going to be any good. So when we think about spatial voice communication as an area of leveling up, we've got mic design and placement, right? This is usually specific to hardware. We want that to ensure that we can really beamform a good signal that can then leverage algorithms to reduce echo and noise, and this is where we really see the first change that we'd like to make, which is we want to exceed our metrics of telephony and voice over IP. What we've got today is just not enough for the kind of spatial experiences that we want to have in the future. And then we've got codecs and networking and everything else that happens there, where our choice of bit rates, the codecs we use, the sample rates we use, are tuned to systems that do not think about immersion, or where at least immersion was not the end goal. But if we want immersion to be the end goal, this whole pipe needs to be leveled up to match the quality and expectations that we want for spatial audio. And then again, when it comes to spatial audio, if I'm wearing a VR headset, maybe it makes sense to give me the best algorithm possible. But if I'm using it over a phone, is there utility in doing so? Ultimately, constraints help us make the best decisions. And when we start working on things and thinking about it at scale, it's easy to get overwhelmed by just the amount of possibilities and things that we need to think about. And as we start productizing a lot of these technologies, this is where we bring in as many constraints, and some of these are just part of the process: cost, time, compute, data from user research, and so on. So we're running out of time, so I just want to quickly jump to my closing thoughts, and then we can talk more about this in the panel discussion. My apologies for all the technical issues that we've run into that has restricted the amount of time we've had today. So just a few closing thoughts. When we talk about building audio technologies for the future, we have to think about an ecosystem of devices. We talk about building technologies for AR and VR. It really is important that we crack these technologies for the kinds of devices that we have, but we will, for a foreseeable future, have people joining in and experiencing these slices of these technologies from a variety of different devices, platforms, and so on, until we reach a point where where VR and AR devices are as ubiquitous as mobile devices. Until that point, we will have people joining in from a variety of devices. How do we support and build that ecosystem and extend the technologies right from the leading edge of AR and VR down to the devices and platforms that people use today? The transition of states and shared experiences really matter. So if as with this conference, if you're each joining in from different devices, how do we maximize for utility and also the sense of immersion and everything else that we care about building these technologies? What barriers can our technologies reduce? How can we build a more inclusive experience for a lot of our people? How can we ensure that we put up as few barriers of entry, considering that we've got enough technological barriers to begin with? And lastly, what do we need to do to level up our infrastructure to support this future? I gave an example of voice communication. That's just one example of where we're dealing with legacy technological stacks that we need to do significant work on to transform it and level it up to the future that we envision. So to close, when we think about scale, and when I think about new realities at scale, it's less about the individual technologies that we're developing. That's all important work that's happening across the industry. But what we really need is a way to weave all of this together into building up an audio technology platform and a future that as many people across the world can experience, regardless of where they are and what devices they use. And that is the kind of inclusive future I'd like to see building up to enable new audio realities at scale. So on that, I'm going to end here, and then we can pass it on to our organizers to figure out what we're doing next.
Thank you so much, Varun, for that inspiring talk and very relevant. We probably are about 10 to 15 minutes behind due to our own technical difficulties here. So I think what we'll do is have two questions. Dustin, if you could do the question and answer. Thank you.
Hi everyone. So you should see a raise hand button on the right side of your screen. And so if you have a question, please press that and I will call on the first two people that get their questions in. It looks like the first person is Aaron Berkson. Hold on just a second. I am unable to put Aaron on air, so Aaron, if you want to just, if you could message me your question, then I will read it out loud. Any other questions right now? Go ahead and hit the hand raise button on the right side of your screen.
All right, Dustin, do you see any other questions?
No, there are no other questions right now.
All right, well, sorry about that, Aaron, but I think we can try again in the panel discussion because we'll be following up on this wonderful keynote over in our panels room. And I think probably since we're behind, we should just go ahead and give Varun Nair one more round of applause, emoji applause, and Varun and our panelists will all head over, and we can all head over to the panels room now. And you will find that in the same way, of course, that you got here, go to your menu and select Events and My Events, and you should find AVAR Panels on that screen of events. So let's head over there.
Awesome.
Hey, Varun.
Look at everybody showing up here.
I can't hear you, though. What's going on here? Varun, can you say something? I have no audio. That's a good start. Good start.
Look, I can hear you both. Can you guys hear me? One thing is to go on air,
That sounds intense.
so make sure you're on air.
That's all right. Keep me busy. That's cool. That's cool.
Yep.
What are you focused on in your studies?
I'm an audio
Matt.
engineering major.
Yeah. Can you hear me once?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, but I'm not getting, Scott and Varun might not both be on air.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I don't even have the on-air icon on Windows 2.
I'm a composer and
So neither do I.
I've done some audio for video games.
Okay, let's find
And I don't see rooms
Music's-
in here either.
Music and tech
I don't
music
see
is
any.
kind of
Yeah.
been my focus more recently.
Because we had
Is this-
over 105
So, digital music?
people in Altspace for that last event.
Film
Yeah,
music
yeah.
specifically.
Dustin's
I
just telling me
got a
he thinks
master
it
of
does not
Royal
have
music
front row.
in London.
Oh my
moved
God.
back to New York.
Okay,
So that was,
Hello.
a lot of what's in style these days, which is big orchestras with synths.
Oh, thank you.
That was a lot of the kind of thing we were talking about and practicing and so forth. But I kind of come from more of a jazz guitar background in terms of what
So
I was
we've got
spending more
some
time
of the panelists up
studying
here.
growing up. As a teenager.
Yeah, and I don't see Jason Schmidt online. So.
Lawrence,
And I'm giving a workshop tomorrow at 12:30 Pacific time
How are you?
on the topic. I managed
Lawrence?
to interview
Yes,
a lot
I
of famous
recognize
people for the paper.
Poppy Crum
Mega
can't get
names
into the panel
from
session.
Hollywood, so it was pretty interesting to get their perspective since they've got $20 million budgets for
had to
music
actually
projects,
go back to
which I have not
Keynote
managed to
and have everybody
finagle
say-
myself.
I'm just thinking disaster planet.
Very nice.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like.
Yeah.
I know we checked. Now it's saying it does.
Before that,
According
no.
to me.
So is the
Okay.
Did you say
Oh,
is it?
I just don't see.
What's the name of your
I
university?
don't see
again?
rooms though.
It's Indiana, Bloomington.
Okay, so I'm looking at this
I'm a
panel
bit
now.
familiar with.
There's
Okay.
like a really
You know, I think we should do a
intense,
reset.
jazz yeah, there isn't there?
Right
You know
away.
you're very.
Let's do that.
Yeah. I worked with a pianist from there, and he's just I don't know what the correct jazz term is, but
preset.
And we're back. Can you hear me, Max? Very Matrix-like glitches.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so let's see.
Oh, yeah,
All
there
right.
we go.
Yeah. Now
Can
I'm
you hear
not
me?
seeing rooms.
Yeah.
I'm
Hey,
just
man.
seeing,
Hey, how's it
everybody
going?
in one room.
Yep,
good.
I'm still not seeing rooms.
How are you?
And we've got 81
Not
guests
too
in
bad.
this room.
It's pretty good. Have a conference open in a small window while working.
I'm emailing
Good to see
Jason Schmidt.
Good to see you too.
Hey, SK Kenicho. How are you doing? Not hearing you. The proximity thing is weird. When you're like sort of way too loud for some people.
Lawrence, we have to
Yes.
figure out we need to figure out some way of
The
getting
floating legless entity to your left.
Poppy
Yeah.
Crum in here.
I really
How's it going?
yeah. I don't.
It.
Hang on. Let me
That's
reply to
one way to think about it. Yes, it is a bit weird. Whereabouts on the planet are you in real life?
Same thing, just a different room.
Oh, cool.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I'm in Manhattan.
All right, Matt.
I was actually living in the UK for the last 2
so
years.
I am
'cause
not a
I
megaphone.
just got a master's.
I mean, I'm not
music
amplifying my voice.
moved
This
back
room
to
is definite.
the U.S.
This room is not front row. I mean, as far as I can tell from my tools.
What do you do in
it does
Liverpool?
appear to be that we have 80 out of 80 people.
I work for a company called Keynote.
Right.
And we
So
specialize
I
in,
think I know it's ridiculous, but I think we should simply go back to Keynote.
Is my username showing as
And have
space
everybody
still?
stand on
Because I changed
stage.
For me, when I click on your head, it shows up as SK
Because remember, this room is they've been
Kinicho.
this has been
K
kind of
I N I C H O.
for the last
Yeah, I
week,
changed it, but I think
every
I
time
probably
I
need
would
to
come
log
back
in and
in,
out
then it
for
would
it
sometimes it would show no front row, and then it would fix itself.
Stefan, nice to meet you.
So I don't know what's going on, but I
I'm
think
guessing you're not from Liverpool.
if we just tell everybody,
No, originally from Germany.
Whereabouts in Germany?
maybe that's what we should do.
I grew up in
What do you think?
Yeah, I can't think
Where's
of
that?
anything else.
Is there a sort of famous place nearby there?
Close to Stuttgart, close to the Rhine.
Okay.
Right. Well, I mean, all of Germany, there's a lot of.
All right, I am here. I cannot hear anybody right now, which is not a good sign.
Oh, Scott.
It's in the
Matt, did you say you emailed?
Scott, you've got a major echo.
Yeah, that's because I done plugged my headphones. My headphones are not working here.
And also technologist. Variety of backgrounds. I'm giving a workshop tomorrow on
I'm getting.
maybe more creative side than the technical side. I need to go better technical stuff.
So, yeah, do we think that's? Do you agree that that's a good workaround?
Not good.
Well, I mean,
You have another suggestion.
and Scott,
could you
your alt space microphone, the little 12 o'clock? Thank you. Yeah. What do you think? I think maybe that's the best thing to do. Unless
Yeah.
you emailed AltSpace and they didn't have any response. Is that correct?
Yeah, but I can't imagine they're going to respond quickly. So
Yeah.
I'll go ahead and put those
Okay, I'm gonna
panelists.
I'm gonna
go ahead.
I'm gonna
Make
make the announcement. Yeah. Okay. Alrighty. Everybody, can you hear me? Quick emoji. Let me see. Only a few of you. Oh, no, there we go. All right. So we are having bleeding edge technical difficulties. This room, unfortunately, so right now with headphones, I'm getting zero audio playback. Okay, Scott, stand by. We'll get to you in a second. So because of that, that means that we can only, this room holds 80 people and you're all here and we have more people who need to get in, including some of our panelists. So we have a horrible workaround that I thought of. We're all going to go back to the Keynote space, which front row enabled, so as many people, we can hold 200 people in that room. So I'm so sorry. I'm going to ask you all to go back to Keynotes. Matt is going to make all the panelists and folks who need to be and presenter status so they can get on stage. So I'm going to stay here. I'm going to ask all of you to return to Keynotes, and we will have the panel discussion there. And of course, avatars will get very tired because there are no chairs on stage, but I'm hoping that they have strong legs and they can bear with us. So I'll see you, everybody, back in AVAR Keynotes for our panel discussion. My apologies for the technical difficulties. routing. I know it's crazy, but it's routing either with hardware or software. It's routing a loop back. So you might want to try changing your audio input under your audio settings and also.
I think it's just background noise because my kids are not completely acoustically isolated from me. So.
Ah, okay. All right. Somebody left the cabinet unlocked?
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you. Thank you once again to Matt and Lawrence and everyone who is supporting this event with all of the technical support of doing a VR event. Thank you all so much for joining us today. My name is Scott Salfon. I'm the audio experiences lead at Facebook Reality Labs. So I work to take our research and figure out basically how to scale it and how to create experiences that can be. And I just got muted. Did I just get muted?
We can hear you.
Okay, you can hear me. Great. Okay, awesome. Could you hear me before, or should I start over? Oh, look at the love.
I think
you're fine.
Okay, we're awesome. Excellent. Let's continue.
Yeah.
So I want to try and spend as much of the time as possible. I've been told that we have a bonus 15 minutes, so we can go until about 11:15. So we've still got about 40 minutes, so I want to get as much of the time for our panelists as possible. So with that, I want to quickly introduce our panelists and get to our first question. So from my right onward, Varun, if each of you could introduce yourselves, who you are, what your role in this space is, and then also what do you think is one of the hard problems in relation to scaling audio technology to millions or to billions of people?
Okay, so hi, I'm Varun. I lead our AR and VR audio software team at Facebook. Most of you just heard me speak with the keynote. I think the biggest challenge we have is in getting our technologies to be accessible to as many people. Accessible by itself is a large word, but we can talk more about that in a bit.
Thank you, Varun. Hi, I'm Kaushik. I work as a principal research scientist at Embody, and Embody as a company, we do a lot of audio technology with a focus of personalization of audio experiences. And thanks so much for organizing this. It's a totally unique experience here. I personally think one of the biggest challenges is I think one of the main things is awareness, and as Varun mentioned, accessibility, of course. But one of the other things if I could refer Varun's presentation, where he mentioned a lot about the most ideal state scenario, where just bringing people the awareness of how incredible spatial audio technologies can be at its best. And once I think we make people aware of that, and we could actually lead products towards that. Thank you.
Thanks, Kaushik. Poppy?
Okay, great. Hi, Poppy Crum. I'm Chief Scientist at Dolby Laboratories and Adjunct Professor at Stanford University. So for me, one of the biggest questions is what it really means to scale experiences. I love hearing words like personalization. When we think about, but the big issues are when things fail, they don't fail by being off a few degrees. They fail in ways that are potentially catastrophic by just not getting it right in the slightest way. That's just the way our brain works. And when you start looking at places where the experiences that are being provided need to be personalized in order to provide, where the difference between very small differences in personalization can lead to either great enhancement in capability and accessibility in terms of the translation of an experience versus someone with just the slightest difference ends up with an experience that is actually working against them, say in a gaming environment. And it's like, ensuring that we're actually enabling robust and consistent experiences, not acceptable experiences, not immersive experiences, but ones that are actually translating the intent of the technology and the creator across the board to all demographics.
Thank you, Poppy. And Remy?
Yeah, hi. This is Remy, head of audio algorithms at Magically. Our work is sort of focused in 4 areas around capture, analysis, synthesis, and rendering for visual computing platform. And we also develop tools for developers to leverage those technologies as plugins for common platforms like Unity and Unreal or Wise. When I think of scale, people have already mentioned, the scaling to a lot of devices, scaling to a large number and variety of people. Another type of scale that I think about is, especially for mixed reality, you need to adapt to the space you're in, and so scaling to a large number of places with experiences where you don't necessarily always have prior knowledge of the space creates some unique challenges, and that's a topic that I'm quite interesting.
So this kind of leads to my first question that I wanted to pose to all of you. And Poppy touched on this a little bit, Varun touched on this in his talk a little bit as well. Can you, as you expand beyond professionals and audio enthusiasts, how do you even communicate audio value to content creators, to consumers, even to other segments of your own business? Like Remy and Varun are parts of the audio components of other technologies. How do you even champion this when there's competition for resources and for space? And anyone can pick this question up first. We don't need to keep going stage left to stage right, but.
Sure, yeah. Happy to have a first shot. I think, one of the challenges is, and this goes to the question of scale as well, is the being able to reach not only a large number and variety of end user, but also a large number of content creators. And there's a range of skills. We have people like the audience of this conference, which is very technologically savvy and interested in getting into the details and playing with a lot of knobs. But to reach a wider audience, we also need to cater to teams where there may be only one or maybe not even one person dedicated to audio, and so we have to make it very simple for them. So there's sort of this trade-off between having tools that are very flexible and you can tweak to your art content versus something that can run in a more automatic mode. So I like to think of the analogy with a car that you can drive in automatic or manual, and having that flexibility, I think, helps a lot in that regard.
To me, the ideal state is where if you're thinking about end users, they just get into the experience and that's it. But we want our technologies to be invisible and melt away into whatever they're experiencing. And then if you're successful at that, everything else is secondary. But getting to that point itself is a tension between vertical integration and sort of horizontal scale, because what I mean by vertical integration is if you're building a device by yourself and you can control the whole stack on top of it, there's lots you can optimize to make the technologies and the underlying features just melt away into something that's seamless. But when you think about horizontal scale, when you're trying to propagate these technologies across a variety of platforms, that's when the other challenges come into play, which is how do you get that to work in areas that you don't really control. And that's where you start to lose and step away from being in an ideal state where everything melts away. Simultaneously, part of it is being able to get our developers and the creative community excited by this, and this is where as technologists we have maximum area for impact by really listening closely to what we need, having a tight iterative cycle where we're able to create and develop technologies and sort of close tandem with people who ultimately make creative use of it is sort of the first seed. But then it's a problem of trying to get that to as many people in a way that is as closely integrated with the experience as possible.
If I could, yeah. Sorry,
go ahead, Kaushik. Oh, I was just gonna. I wanted to refocus the question for all of you a little bit more towards how do you show, convince, educate people without having to dive into the underlying science and technology of what you're working on? Like, how do you not have to pull back the curtain and say this experience is amazing, it's more amazing than it would have been without this technology?
Right. So yeah, if I could add a little bit more on what Varun and Remy spoke, I think what is one of the key things that's important is what I call the audio ecosystem triad. So we have the content creation, the content creators, and then there is the distribution medium, and then there is the devices and all the end consumer products and the technologies that we use. And it should be a seamless connection between all these three different legs: the content creation, the distribution, and the devices. And if one of the falls, the entire thing collapses. And it is important to understand and explain the content creators why their work is so much important, and why we need to all be in the same ecosystem of spatial audio technology, whatever be the particular technology that we are going to work on. And one of the key things is really shaping rich audio experiences. And like in trade shows, you go and show what is the possibility and of creating some amazing spatial audio technologies, and how, as a content creator, can add and improve this experience.
Hi.
Go for it, Poppy.
Hello. Yeah, sorry, I got kicked out of the room for a moment. I'm back now. But I have a question in reframing what you're asking, but partly for the panel. How do you think about consistency, like translation of creators' intent and technological intent? I think both they're different, but at the same time quite similar in what we're with regard to scalability. Because I haven't heard those words used in any of the discussions quite with, I think, the magnitude that they have in immersive experiences. Because compelling isn't really an answer in many cases when you're talking about a performance, creating optimal performance in a gaming environment, or you're creating, the scene awareness and scene situational intelligence, or you're trying to improve communication environment and you want to have reduced cognitive load, or you want to know that you're truly translating a creator's intent in a way that hasn't compromised the experience. So I'm really interested to know how each individual thinks about that in a different way, and what the key components are to knowing that every individual is having what you would consider to be successful engagement and robust translation of that information.
Right. So,
go ahead. I was going to say, I think that's a great question for all of our panelists, but please.
Yeah, that's an amazing question, Poppy. So one of the things that we've been working on in our team is building virtual studio plugins. It's not the most sophisticated spatial audio technology system, but in this product we've been going to different studios. In the plugin you have a whole list of studios, and you can virtually mix and master your music in each of these individual studios. And to answer your question, one of the things that we've been actively working on and make sure that the technology on its own is seamless and works for most people is really working these content creators and these sound engineers, where they this is a headphone only technology, right? So they're virtually mixing on headphones, but A/Bing with the speakers, and really tuning the plugin, or really tuning the technology to make sure it's the virtual studio is as close to their real studio experience as possible. And that brings one level of confidence in making sure the experience is similar for an end user. Now, at the end of the day, of course, there are other parameters that could really, break this flow. That is, what is the device that the end user is using? Are they using the good headphones, or they just what is the response of these headphones? And so I'm just going into the details, but these other parameters become so much more important in spite of making sure that everything else is as perfect as possible. And that's the entire challenge I think we have in when we are looking at scaling these systems and making sure it works the best for everyone.
How do you quantify that when your users are having different experiences? Or how do you judge whether they are or aren't, or having experience that is, in the direction of the creative intent? I mean, one of the things I love doing, I think a lot of people on this panel and in the audience is playing, for one individual or 4 different HRTFs for them to hear with different body types, and it's such a major difference, and it's not a difference that's a few degrees off. It's the difference of an entire creative experience suddenly being turned upside down or taken away. And the problem is that people don't know what right is. Right? Introspection's really tough, and when you don't know what the target is, how do we as a collective technological community know that we can aim towards creative intent and actually be hitting that when those targets are unknown?
Yeah, if I can make a comment on that, I think on the question of personalization, I think there is a broader topic as well, which is about having the experience fit in your space. And maybe this is mostly relevant for mixed reality and a little bit less for VR. In VR, it's a bit like a video game where you have knowledge ahead of time of the space, and so you can sort of curate the experience to match the virtual space. But with mixed reality, you need to adapt the experience to the space you're in. A couple of examples would be, if you want to render a virtual object, make it sound like it's in a room next door. It should sound attenuated, maybe it's diffracting around the wall, and you hear it coming from the door. If the object is in the same room as you, it has to have a reverb acoustic signature that sounds like it belongs in the space you're in. And so I think it's important to think of the full system and how the contribution of the different components, including personalization, which typically when we say personalization we think of HRTF, but there are other aspects such as maybe the coupling of the playback speakers with your own ears. There's maybe your own hearing system. If you're hearing impaired, you may need something personalized for you in terms of equalization. And then there's the personalizing to the space you're in. And I think it's important to take all of that into account. And there's a balance between the creator having a well-curated experience that they want to reproduce in a different space, and to be able to do that, at least in the context of mixed reality, that will require some adaptation to that space. And so yeah, it brings up some interesting challenges in terms of what is important to retain, and what are the controls that are useful. For instance, is it useful to provide for spatialization engine exact control over the reverb time, or is it more useful to provide a knob that's providing an offset compared to the real acoustics of your space? And
I love your answer, Remy.
Yeah.
I think it's a really it's not just about HRTF. It's about many different things. It's biology, it's body, it's environment, but yeah, absolutely. And my question is mostly though, then what does it mean for what's the baseline for scalability? Like, what do we accept if we know these things have such a major impact on the experience?
So another way to frame that is, what is the analogy or what is the equivalent of the mastering stage that we have for music? Right? So we know that, say, for music production or even film production, that while there are infinite listening scenarios and infinite speaker setups and infinite headphone frequency responses, we try and go for some kind of a baseline that we master to. What is that baseline that we're mastering our XR, MR, VR experiences, and how do we go about setting that? To me, it's also a question of, do we choose to excel and in a few specific scenarios, or do we go wide and be okay with lots of different scenarios? For example, you could tune the experience based on whatever personalization features you choose, whether it's HRTF or everything else, for a finite set of devices or ecosystems. What happens to the rest, and do the rest matter, and how do you even go about defining whether they matter or not?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and so I think it's a lot of it depends on the application we are looking at, right? Like if you're looking at gaming applications, we may not all these different parameters may matter to that extent. We could get away with not really personalizing the HRTFs for something like distance perception, because our human localization of distance is already so bad. And for other MR experiences, like what Remy mentioned, personalization of ambience or the reverb, the early reflections become so much more critical. And I think one of the things that one could do is having a feedback system from the users, and something starting from a small scale and then going to larger scale experiments.
That kind of that leads back to one of the questions that I'd hoped to ask, but we actually skipped over initially. But could each of you I wanted to talk a little bit more about scale, and oh, hi Poppy, are you back? No, she fell out again. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
Yes.
I was just going to say, I think, it's a funny thing because, you said you can, like you made the comment, we don't need personalized HRTFs for distance. Well, localization is not the only thing that gets impacted, right? It's localization, it's reaction times and performance because of cognitive effort. Cognitive effort, you can have, you may have reasonable localization because the centroid is okay, but you have increased variability, or you have masking because you have collapsed space that only shows up in complex scenes. But, if you have cognitive effort, cognitive load, that has, that's going to lead to fatigue, frankly, can lead to migraines, can lead to, other issues. And what you end up with is you may have you have demographic differences that can show up, right, that are, unique to, physical features even. And that starts to be a question. I think we often ask too narrow, we take too narrow a look at what acceptable is in terms of the experiential importance of these questions.
No, that's a great point, Poppy. What I was mentioning is I guess the extension of personalization would differ when we are looking at different parameters.
I hear someone's mic rumbling. Does someone want to say something else?
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. I just think it becomes something else. Like, at distance, it's not about localization anymore. It's about timbre. It's about, spectral quality. It's about other things that still are important in creative intent. And then it also is about long-term fatigue and success and such. And it's just, these all become part of what is important in a scalable experience, I think. So, I mean,
absolutely, yeah.
Well, since the conversation is about personalization of spatial audio and sort of experience overall, I guess that's one of the big questions that I want to ask you, because I think up on stage here we have represented many different strategies for addressing that. I guess I wanted to ask our panelists a question that I knew we would get some disagreement on, which is, what do you think is the relative value of solving the problem of personalization completely individually versus a small number of presets versus improving on sort of an existing generic one-size-fits-all kind of model?
Well, as we just discussed, even the process of trying out different HRTFs, even if you're well-versed in this area and you have lots of experience, is extremely disorienting. and our brains will quickly adapt to just a preset that you choose. You play with it for a while, you use it for a few days, a few weeks, and before you know it, your brain's adapted to it. And I myself have I've been through this process so many times over the past few years where I've been constantly rewiring my brain, which leaves me in a confused state often. So I personally am not a fan of preset-based approaches unless we find that there's really good value to do it, because even the best of us are often the most confused when it comes to trying to select best spatial audio or best HRTF.
No, I totally agree with Varun here. So the preset-based HRTF might work for some people, in some cases, but not all the time, is what I have seen. And one of the things that we are working on is an image-based HRTF approach. It's not perfect, but it's one way to get to personalized HRTFs based on AI. And I think one of the most important things that we realize is it's how much of the friction it is for the end consumer to get to this, getting these personalized HRTFs, or in fact any other personalization, be it reverb or ambience of in the room and other factors. But the friction point is very important. How easy it is for the individual to get there. Do they have to do some measurements, or do they have to actually listen to the audio and give feedback? And some of these things becomes extremely important at the end of the day if we want to actually make this adaptable to large scale.
And yeah, this is Poppy speaking. I completely agree with you. I mean, we have generative solutions for personalized HRTFs that take less than a minute, and we're at a point where, the computational, advancements in 3D volumetric scanning and cameras on mobile devices and computational capabilities in the cloud, everything is enabling us to answer these questions, think about them differently than we could have 5 years ago even, and really democratize these experiences. But it takes a change and a shift in sort of scalability, also a change in mindset, because one-size-fits-all solutions have been so anchored in the industry because that was the only possibility to put people in an anechoic chamber and spend a day with them. And now, through computational rendering, we're able to do better, I'd say, because all the noise introduced from anechoic chambers and movement of humans is taken away, and computational modeling and such can do much better. So the point is, multiple companies, and just academically, we're able to solve these problems in scalable ways. I completely agree that the engagement of the consumers really, where a lot of it lies in ensuring that you get the right you get the right data going in. But then, Remy's point, which is, on top of it, is not just HRTF. It's recognizing that our biological capacity, which again, it's how do we layer the full stack, and which things, how do we deal with that in a scalable way, in a way that is, both optimized, but also solving all of these problems, because, obviously environment is critical as well. But the difference is today we can technologically think about this problem in a much more effective, personalized, and very different way than we could just a few years ago.
It's a question about what's really important, right? Because if, like in the MR use case where you're trying to, and what's really important for the experience in an MR scenario where the experience that you're in really depends on the sound, on you believing that the sound in the room next to you. At that point, the reverberation or your propagation engine is probably more critical to that experience than a highly accurate HRTF model, or vice versa. If you're dealing with near field interactions that are sort of at minute scale, then that becomes a lot more important than reverberation. But then externalization is also critical if you're dealing with near field experiences. So what are those trade-offs that we need to make?
So I have a question, because I get that the trade-offs matter, but at the same time, again, this is where I think sometimes we take too narrow a lens at where we're just describing the use case and the importance of success in that particular use case. If I'm in an environment and I have one experience. I don't have the experience of the broad demographic that's going to interact with that technology. And even if I think, okay, so most humans, I don't need to care about localization. It's not going to have as big an impact for this use case. The cognitive load, the fatigue, and the mental strain that it can cause can bias can bias or take away the capability of having a successful experience for a particular demographic. I mean, we know that these are very separable when we success is based on our body shapes and our underlying biology. So it's not just about does it matter in this condition, because it still has impact. It has impact on cognitive effort and cognitive load and fatigue and timbre, which becomes very important. And if I'm listening to music, or I'm in VR, and even though I can control that scene, if I haven't gotten it right, the fatigue, cognitive load, reaction times, strain on neuroplasticity that I'm having to undergo is more substantial for me than someone else. And that may be me as a woman as opposed to a man, or me as a small woman as opposed to me as a particular ethnicity as opposed to somebody else. And that's where I start to say, okay, we've got to think about this much more holistically.
Yeah, there's no question about that. And I think that's increasingly going to be a bigger problem area for us to solve as the market grows and more people get experiences outside of, say, dominant markets in North America and Europe. And as we scale this out to the rest of the world, that becomes increasingly more important. How would you, this is a question for rest analysts, with finite resources and time, how do you figure out where to invest in first? Or if you have to invest simultaneously, how do you balance out time and effort spent in these areas?
Yeah, I think on the comment on the I guess one question there, because potentially it is the assessment of the improvement you get from personalization, I think it's true that there's easier and easier ways now to generate personalized RTF, and there's certainly ways to show in the lab that those provide a clear improvement. I think it's also worth thinking of them in the context of your system. So in the end, if you integrate those HRTF in a rendering engine, that may be an engine that has to be done very, very efficiently on the mobile device. You have to think of how much of those benefits still translate through in that context. Maybe you're using a rendering engine that uses a low order ambisonic busing under the hood or something like that, where there may be limitation that kind of prevent from getting the full benefit of personalization. Otherwise, I mean, in terms of assessing the performance, of course, there's doing experimental listening tests. I'm actually presenting a paper this afternoon on a more analytical approach, but yeah, I think it's going back to my earlier point. I think it's important to think in the full context. And so if you're developing an application where it's very crucial to have high spatial accuracy, maybe it's for a professional that needs that as part of their work, and so there it's very important to have spatial accuracy. If your application is maybe more about entertainment and you want people to hear, let's say, someone behind you, and the most important is that they know to turn around once they can see you, they localize you directly, and you want them to do that quickly. There's different tests, I guess, depending on your target application. You may choose a different way to measure how well you're doing and how much the personalization is improving on that point.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and a lot of it, I think, boils down to the metrics and how do we even know this is working for the end consumer. And yes, we have lab techniques, and we in my team we have a lab space. We do experiments. We do localization tests with, generated personalized HRTFs through AI, and it all works. But how do we, at the end of the day, how do we assess if this is actually working? And this is actually a question to you, Poppy, because you were talking about the cognitive load earlier. What are there techniques, or what kind of techniques do you foresee that at the end of the day, how do we know that the end user is not cognitively loaded with certain techniques over other?
Sure. And again, so to Remy's point, I am a huge believer in objective metrics of the pipeline. I think these are things that, we should be able, we need better models of prediction of success of the translation across all the pipeline to the end user, so that we can anticipate their, or we can objectively, and be able to model what we anticipate their subjective experience will be. But that being said, things like cognitive load, you can pick up in the diameter of the pupil, you can pick up in other behavioral reaction time. Reaction time often can show up as cognitive load. Obviously self-report, but I'm a big believer in a lot of, you with a headset on, you're getting, you potentially have sensors engaged in places that you can amalgamate those for some metric of cognitive effort. That pupil diameter is a really good metric, and that is definitely one that can show up under certain, show up easily with certain. You could have a test scenario, but also a good metric is people engaging and having feedback. Right, that's definitely one that I think shows up a lot. Cognitive effort you can pick up in the ear as well. Right now, that's, I think in the 3 years, we'll see a lot of earbuds that do measure cognitive effort. Sorry, I'm not sure if that's...
No, that's perfect. Thank you so much.
I think that's great, and that also returns us to the conversation that we had earlier about, are there effective measurement techniques that we can use for creative intent being communicated to the user, and the user having a quality experience, which I think is sort of still an unexplored area, or underexplored area, that I think we need to solve. We are coming up towards the end of the time that we had allocated. So Lawrence, do we have any, or Matt, do we have any questions from the audience that we wanted to go ahead and ask at this time? Otherwise, I do have another question. Oh, look, a new button just popped up. People can raise their hands to ask questions, like magic.
All right, so the first person I have up is Aaron McLaren. Go ahead and ask your question, Aaron.
Hi. So my name's Aaron. I work over at Epic Games. I was curious in terms of HRTF personalization, if there has been any discussion about forming a sort of standard or some method of figuring out some way to get interchange between different applications and platforms. From my perspective, supporting 7 platforms with Fortnite, where we have HRTF through Google Resonance, getting some kind of personalization would be very powerful, but we would need it to work across all platforms now in the future. And I think the only way to do that is probably through some standardization or some format discussions. I'd like to hear what y'all think about that.
Yeah. I mean, I was just going to say, Agnieszka's in the front row, and she worked heavily, didn't you, on the SOFA format? And there are standardized formats for HRTF coefficient exchange. But
And maybe a comment on that is I agree, and I think those formats, SOFA, for instance, is certainly used in academia and in the labs. Maybe to the point of the question is maybe what's missing potentially is integration, better integration in product, so to make it easier for end users to use. Yeah.
I think another challenge. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Tommy.
No, I agree with you, Remy. I mean, I think that is an issue. But I think you will see different solutions and different approaches to to an HRTF personalization, and need to be able to work with different solutions because they're often optimized then for the different renderers and the renderer that's being used for a particular engagement effort.
And that's what I was going to follow up and ask about, which I think Aaron was kind of touching on, is even using one platform in air quotes here. I can't do air quotes with my avatar, but like, what do we think about developing consistency of spectral characteristics, of implementation, of making it so that spatialized sound on one platform sounds like another platform? Because even using, one existing solution, if you were to do bitwise comparisons of, how sounds are rendered based on different devices, obviously you got headphone EQ coming into play as well. Are there opportunities for us to make it easier for creatives to get their vision met across different platforms, which is just kind of an ongoing challenge?
Right. I think that's a great point what you mentioned here. If we look at the stereo counterpart and specifically talking about headphones and is there a standard there, Sean Oliver and his team has done a lot of work on standardization of the headphone curves for, what sounds great for a particular headphone, what EQ sounds great. But I think the translation of that to all the way to the spatial audio domain where we are applying HRTFs where we, with all these different notches and boosts, the same set of curves doesn't apply here, and so I think that's still I think a research that is kind of missing, and I think Facebook is working on that as well. So that's something I believe is super important to get standardized, at least for applications like virtual audio and virtual music, virtual studio, surround sound applications.
To me, it's similar to this is a highly reduced example, but like gain staging, right? So we want our pipelines to have good gain staging, not to boost the signal unnecessarily. So the ideal state we should get to is that our devices are able, that whatever devices out there or platforms are able to sort of self-equalize based on whatever hardware deformations or characteristics they have, so that whatever HRTF or spatial engine you load in, it ends up sort of passing through with all of those factors taken into account. Of course, sometimes the best outcomes you have is when these systems are highly optimized and tightly coupled. I think there's an opportunity here to decouple them and ensure that increasingly platforms are able to sort of have the equivalent of unity gain staging across the signal chain for spatial audio.
All right, and we do have one more hand raised here. So Aaron Berkson, go ahead and ask your question.
I can't hear.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
And the panel's hear me now. Okay, great.
Go for it.
Okay. So many of you have kind of addressed this in different ways, but I'm wondering where you see the most likely use cases that will drive further adoption of the medium, whether it's consumer or business or whatever the context might be, and maybe what constraints are associated with those use cases that you think are most likely to drive greater adoption.
Can you clarify which medium? What medium, like VR or what?
Well, really across the board, VR, AR, immersification of on-location experience in terms of applications of these cutting-edge spatial audio technologies, where you think the low-hanging fruit is now and what it might be in the future in terms of things that will drive either consumers or businesses to have a very quicker adoption curve than we might have seen in some other outside of the areas that it's being adopted now. I don't know if that's overly vague, but where do you think it's going to catch on?
I think we're living through an example right now where we have a strong need to come together and meet people because we are unable to physically do so. Of course, this is an extreme scenario, but I think we're starting to see the possibilities of what these mediums can do in their very early forms. Is this the best setup for a virtual conference? We've got a take of it now. But is this the best setup, and how will it evolve in the future? We should see. But I also think that as we start to scale, we will start to see a differentiation in some things that might be really great to do in VR, and other things maybe that might be really great to do in AR, or other things that maybe a mobile device is still good for. Not sure what that looks like, but we're starting to see more of these use cases pop up over the past few years, where increasingly, or at least initially, a lot of the content in VR was gaming scenarios and of course cinematic VR content and so on. But we're starting to see applications like these that are starting to help bring people together, help us communicate, meet people, play with each other across different time zones and geographies, which I think is an exciting area of development in the next few years.
Great.
Totally agree with Varun here. Just to add on, I think one of the other things that I'm personally excited about is I think live streaming music in spatial audio, and I think with 5G technologies coming up and with ambisonic and hybrid audio distribution, I think that's going to be a huge thing, and that's yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that collaboration in general, I think, is a big application, and as Varun mentioned, especially with the current circumstance where travel and meeting in person isn't always an option. I think there's sort of a big potential there, and I think audio plays a very important role. Even before VR and AR became more popular, and again. You already saw with things like Dolby Voice, the use of spatial audio for improving telecommunication. I think just in general, remote collaboration is a big area that has a lot of potential for this type of technology.
Right. Matt or Lawrence, do we have time for one more question, or do we need to move on?
We need to wrap it up. Because otherwise our schedule will be off. But I hate to have to cut it out short, but let's close it up, Scott.
Yeah, well, thank you all again so much for joining us. Thank you so much to our panelists for a great and very resonant conversation. I know spatial audio is super on everyone's mind. I mean, even just in this conversation, being able to hear each of you from a different location in the room was such an improvement over the video conferences that I do day to day. So an enormous thanks again for panelists and to everyone for coming to AVAR, and we look forward to seeing you at the various social and workshop and panel events coming up next. Thanks again for coming.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey, another round of applause for our panelists. Thank you all. Since we're running tight, I'm sorry to bully us along here, but we have our 2 parallel sessions starting, supposed to start at 11:30, so our tech crew is going to be scrambling. But for the AVAR Papers session number 1, AR VR Sound Perception, that will be in the AVAR Papers event starting 11:30 or thereabouts. But if you want to head over now and unmute your mics and chat and meet people and make friends, then AVAR Workshops is also starting at the same time in AVAR Workshops. That's Workshop Session 1, Acoustics for XR. So we'll see you in either of those 2 places. Also, AVAR Lobby is open if anybody needs just to take a break from amazing panel discussions and other things. Head on over there. But we'll see you in Papers or Workshops in a few minutes, and thank you so much.